The old dirt road snaked into Ravenwood, swallowed by fog, thick, white, and cold. It clung to Thomas, soaking through his coat, chilling him to the bone. He had been driving for hours, lost since the storm blinded the roads. Ravenwood, a name on a weathered signpost, was his only refuge. The village was eerily silent, houses huddled like shadows, barely visible through the dense fog. Lamplight, weak and yellow, seeped from a few windows, doing little to pierce the oppressive gloom. Thomas shivered, a sense of foreboding settling over him. Where was everyone? He parked in front of the only building with its lights fully on, a quaint inn with faded paint. The sign above creaked ominously in the wind, the Golden Raven. He hoped for warmth, maybe some answers. Stepping inside, he was met with more silence. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp wood and something else, something metallic and strange. He rang the bell on the counter, its chime echoing through the empty inn. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. A figure emerged from the back, startling Thomas. It was an old woman, her face etched with wrinkles, her eyes filled with an unsettling wariness. "You shouldn't be here," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves. "Not after dark." "My car broke down," Thomas lied, desperate for shelter. "The storm," he gestured vaguely towards the fog outside. "I need a room." The woman hesitated, her gaze lingering on him, cold and assessing. One night, she finally conceded, her voice barely a whisper. "But do not, under any circumstances, leave this inn after sunset." He tried to question her, to understand the strange warning, but she remained tight-lipped. She showed him to a dusty room, the air thick with the same metallic scent from downstairs. He thanked her more out of politeness than gratitude. Something wasn't right. Unable to shake off the unease, Thomas tried to distract himself. He ate the bland stew left outside his door, each bite tasteless and heavy in his stomach. The silence of the inn was unnerving, broken only by the creaking floorboards and the howling wind outside. He peeked out the window. The fog had thickened, if that was even possible. He could barely see the outline of the houses across the street. And then he saw them. Figures, dark and shapeless, moving in the fog. They drifted between buildings, silent and swift. He rubbed his eyes, but the figures remained. He couldn't make out any features, just their shadowy forms gliding through the mist. A cold dread gripped him. Who were they? What was happening in this village? The next day, Thomas ventured out, curiosity overriding his fear. He needed answers. He approached a villager chopping wood, a burly man with suspicious eyes. "What is this place?" Thomas asked, his voice tight with apprehension. The man stopped chopping, his gaze fixed on Thomas. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered, echoing the innkeeper's words. "Leave while you still can." He refused to elaborate. Every villager Thomas approached gave him the same response. Warnings, veiled threats, and a chilling silence about the village's secrets. He managed to glean whispers of an ancient curse, something about a pact and a sacrifice. The fog seemed to press in on him, suffocating him with its oppressive weight. He needed to leave, to escape this place, but the fog held him captive, a prisoner in a village shrouded in fear and whispers. Desperate for answers, Thomas returned to the inn. The old woman was behind the counter, her gaze more unsettling than before. "Tell me," he demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "Tell me what's going on in this village." The old woman sighed, a weary sound that seemed to echo the village's sorrow. "The fog," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It holds us captive. It takes something from us every night, and in return, it grants us life." "What do you mean?" Thomas pressed, his heart pounding in his chest. "What does it take?" The old woman looked at him, her eyes filled with a chilling sadness. "It takes our voices," she whispered, "and every night it demands a sacrifice." As night fell, the fog grew thicker, seeping into the inn like a phantom. Thomas felt a growing sense of dread. He watched from his window as the villagers, their faces pale and drawn, gathered in the village square. They moved like sleepwalkers, their silence more terrifying than any scream. He saw them, the shadowy figures from the fog. They emerged from the mist, their forms shifting and swirling. The villagers formed a circle, their heads bowed in silent supplication. Thomas watched in horror as the figures moved to the center of the circle. He couldn't make out what they were doing, but the air grew heavy with the same metallic scent he'd noticed before. It was the smell of blood. Driven by a morbid curiosity, Thomas crept out of the inn. He had to see what was happening. He hid behind a building, his heart pounding against his ribs, and peered out at the spectacle. The figures in the center were chanting, their voices a low guttural sound that sent shivers down Thomas's spine. He strained to see, his breath catching in his throat. In the center of the circle lay a body, shrouded in a white cloth. The chanting grew louder, the fog swirling faster around the villagers. The air crackled with an unseen energy, and then, with a sound like thunder, a bolt of lightning shot down from the sky, striking the center of the circle. Thomas stumbled back, his heart hammering in his chest. He had to get out of this village. This wasn't a village, it was a nightmare. As he turned to flee, he ran headlong into a solid wall of fog. It surrounded him, cold and damp, suffocating him with its cloying embrace. He thrashed against it, but it held him fast. He was trapped. Panic surged through him, cold and sharp. He was going to die here in this godforsaken village, another sacrifice to the fog. He heard a noise behind him, a slow, deliberate clapping. He turned slowly, his blood turning to ice. Standing in the fog, illuminated by the faint moonlight, was the old woman from the inn. Her face, once etched with worry, now held a look of chilling triumph. "You shouldn't have seen that," she rasped, her voice even more unsettling than before. "Now you have to stay." She lunged at him, her frail hands surprisingly strong. He screamed, a primal sound of terror that ripped through the silent village. And then he ran. He didn't know where he was going, but he ran blindly, desperately through the fog. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs ached. He didn't dare look back. The fog seemed to thin, and he saw the faint outline of the road. His car. He had escaped. He didn't stop, didn't look back, until Ravenwood was nothing but a distant nightmare in his rearview mirror.